Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for June 13th, 2011, the podcast that wonders what happened to preparations A through G. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's train our sights on the news of the bogus. A group of Orlando activists were arrested a couple of weeks ago, and you'll never guess what for. Just last week we saw people arrested for dancing quietly to themselves and for not predicting earthquakes. Just when you thought it couldn't get any worse, these activists have been arrested for, get this, feeding the homeless.
New tonight, the city of Orlando kept its promise and had police arrest members of a group serving meals to the homeless in Lake Eola Park.
The group Food Not Bombs is angry about a city ordinance that limits how many times a year it can serve food to the homeless in the city park.
Orlando police moved quickly and were well orchestrated. A caravan of 4 squad cars pulled up to Lake Eola off Central Boulevard. Cops exited their cruisers, marched right up to the Food Not Bombs members serving the homeless, and arrested 3 of them because they didn't have a permit to hold the event. Officers were in plain clothes recording the whole thing. Jessica Cross, Benjamin Markison, and Jonathan McHenry are in the Orange County Jail right now. They cooperated with cops and went peacefully to waiting cruisers. John Kurtz with OrlandoCopWatch.com posted bond for Cross and Markison.
Good people break bad laws, and Food Not Bombs is completely in the right. This city ordinance is unconstitutional, and it's just unethical. Within the last 30 minutes, we received this cell phone video of the arrest from Food Not Bombs members. Food Not Bombs has been in a legal battle with the city of Orlando for 5 years now. There's a city ordinance that restricts groups from having multiple feedings in the downtown area. You can only have 2 per year with the right permit. Food Not Bombs officials said the feedings were a form of free speech. In April, the federal appeals court agreed with the free speech argument, but said it was fair to restrict the number of events. And last week, the city issued the group its 2 permits for the year. Food Not Bombs has had at least 3 unpermitted gatherings since. Tonight's event was the last straw.
Why does Orlando not want people feeding the homeless? Do they think it's like stray cats that if you feed them, you'll get more of them? Why limit the permits so much? And why do you need a permit to give some hungry people some food anyway? Here are more activists standing up for our basic liberties, no matter the cost. If this trend continues, it can only bode well for the future. Well, the future of everything except big government goons. Police in Texas were given a tip-off about a mass grave full of dozens of dismembered bodies. Police officers, assisted by Texas Rangers and FBI agents, combed the entire area around the specified house looking for this mass grave. The tip-off was given to them by a psychic, and guess what they found? Nothing. Gee, what a surprise. Liberty County Commissioner Craig McNair vented his frustration, saying, "There's no crime scene. Whoever this person was who gave this tip, we'll be in touch with her, and we could hold her responsible for giving a false tip and creating this havoc." Good thing, too. False tips like this not only consume taxpayer resources, they divert police and investigators from looking into real crimes. It also created a panic among the people who lived near the house they were searching. These things cause real harm. Of course, now the local police are spending money investigating whether or not it was a hoax. Well, let me save the taxpayers in Liberty County, Texas some money. Yes, it was a hoax. All psychics are hoaxes. The fact is, there has never been a single verifiable instance where a psychic has given police any useful information leading to a successful conclusion, and many cases where they've sent police down blind alleys. But what's even more perverse is the actions of the media surrounding this investigation. The local media, as well as CNN, reported that the police had found 20 to 30 bodies in the area, mimicking what the psychic had told the police department. The police then had to correct them when no bodies were found. Is it really too much to ask of investigative journalists to do a little investigative journalism? As for the psychic, it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, she says when she's confronted. Most psychics try to retrofit their so-called predictions to fit what happened. But it's hard to see how that will happen here. Not when there were exactly 0 of the 20 to 30 bodies she said were there were actually found, and when the blood on the porch she said was from one of the victims turned out to be from an attempted suicide of someone who's now in a psychiatric hospital. Maybe the one good thing that can come from all of this is for people to realize that psychics are nothing more than scam artists. Oh, but wait, I forgot. This doesn't prove that all of the other psychics aren't scammers. even though there isn't a single piece of scientific data showing that they can actually do what they claim. Wake up, America. If we can be duped this easily, it's no wonder the country's in such a mess right now. According to CNN, the Global Commission on Drug Policy released a report saying the war on drugs is a failure. And in other news, water is wet. Actually, the real news here is this is finally being said by some high-profile politicos, such as former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, Virgin Group founder Richard Branson, and Nobel Prize-winning author and journalist Mario Vargas Llosa. Their recommendations included ending drug criminalization as well as zero tolerance and just say no policies. About time. It's nice to see such high-profile people, respected in political circles, coming out and saying what many of us have known for decades. If anything, they're guilty of understatement. If they were really perceptive and courageous enough to tell the truth, they would have said that people own their own bodies, that they have the right to put whatever substance they want into their own bodies, and the government has no business whatsoever regulating their private activities. They might also have pointed out, in addition to all the violent crime generated, the hideous police corruption that results from drug prohibition, as well as the loss of many of our precious liberties. 2 weeks ago, this podcast reported that, thanks to the war on drugs, the Supreme Court found that police can force their way into your home as long as they smell what they think is marijuana, and after they knock, hear sounds of movement that may be people hiding evidence. And over the years, we've seen many stories about cops busting into the wrong house and shooting the family dog. In one case, an innocent 92-year-old woman, blind and mostly deaf, was killed when police barged into her house, shot her several times, and then planted drugs on her. We've also seen the footage of a drug raid on a high school in Goose Creek, South Carolina, where officers had their weapons out and were pointing them at the students. Oh, and they didn't find any drugs or any drug money at all. The war on drugs is a hideous disaster that destroys lives all over the country, and the reverberations affect us all. To call it a failure is like calling World War II a minor kerfuffle. Still, it's a significant first step in an era where it's political suicide to criticize this golden boy of government intrusion. Here's hoping that more politicians will listen and people will start calling on their representatives to end this insanity. If you're like me, you know cicadas as the cricket-like insects that croon softly in the woods and ring in your mornings. To many others, including a lot of farmers, they're a pest that has to be dealt with. Well, to people in Columbia, Missouri, they're a delicacy, with an immensely popular cicada ice cream being sold every 13 years when the cicadas become heavily populated. Sparky's homemade ice cream collected the cicadas themselves, removed the wings, boiled them, and coated them in brown sugar and milk chocolate. But now, the Columbia Department of Public Health wants them to stop. The reason? There's nothing in the food code about cicadas. Cicadas and other insects are incredibly nutritious, and although most of us here in the US might balk at the idea of eating insects, they've actually been a primary staple of human beings throughout recorded history. Cicadas have been shown many times to be safe for human consumption, and these cicadas were cooked all the way through, killing any pathogens that may have harmed people. Cicadas have also been shown to not have anything in their bodies that is toxic to humans. But according to Jerry Worley, an environmental health goon with the Columbia County Department of Public Health, cicada ice cream shouldn't be served because there's nothing written into their food code that directly addresses how cicadas should be cooked. Is this how it works? We're not allowed to eat anything unless the government approves it first? It's bad enough that the nanny state tries to ban food they think is bad for us. Now they want to stop us from eating everything they haven't bothered to look into yet. Okay, so the health department just advised them to stop selling it, and didn't order an outright ban, but since when does the government even have the authority to give such advice? There were no reported ill effects from anyone eating the ice cream. It was the actions of a busybody bureaucrat, and when an official gives advice, it has a different effect than when you or I give advice. How many times has such advice been ignored only to have the government then turn around and use force? This is how it works. Everything government does is backed up by guns, but they want to hide that fact as much as they can. So they start off giving advice, making suggestions, and when you don't follow their advice, then they say is the time to act. They've been reasonable. They have given them a chance to do the right thing, and now they just have no choice but to come in and take care of things themselves. And if they can do it with an exotic flavor of ice cream that was only sold for half an hour, what else could they do with it? As a result of all of this, if you want to try Cicada ice cream, you'll have to wait until 2024. If the nanny state hasn't banned it by then, that is. Another group of people who'd love to tell you what to eat are the organic nutcases. These are the people who think we'd all be better off if we went back to producing food at a time when starvation and disease made someone lucky to live past 40. Last week, Germany had an outbreak in E. coli poisoning that was traced to an organic farm. This outbreak has resulted in 23 deaths and over 1,000 hospitalizations. What is going on here, where countries across the globe have declared a moratorium on the construction of nuclear power stations in the wake of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, a disaster that killed precisely 0 people, but the same environmentalist lobby that stops nuclear power gets organic farming going like gangbusters as dozens of people die? More people have died from E. coli poisoning in the last 2 years than have ever died from nuclear fission, and that's if you include the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It is absolutely clear the modern environmentalist movement is about pushing a political agenda, not protecting the environment or making it safer or healthier. When it comes to something they're against, even the only efficient way we have of generating carbon-free energy, they take the precautionary principle to the extreme. When it comes to their Bogosity, they just spread misinformation about how healthy organic farming is as the bodies pile higher. What makes this even more egregious is that pretty much all E. coli outbreaks, whether they're caused by organic farming or not, can be prevented with a simple, decades-old procedure of irradiation. But guess what? The environmentalists have successfully lobbied against that as well. And they did it by conflating the idea of radiation, which goes away as soon as the source of the radiation is turned off, with radioactive material, which can stay behind and cause problems. There is no radioactive material involved in the irradiation of foods. The idea that it would leave behind anything harmful goes against everything we know about physics and chemistry. Yet, the environmentalists win over sound science. Of course, now some people are going to want to go the other way and ban or at least heavily regulate organic foods. But the nanny state is not a solution to the idiot state. If we have a right to put drugs into our own bodies and take on that risk ourselves, so we have that right with organic foods. And if Christian Scientists have the right to endanger their lives by rejecting modern medicine, then the organic nutcases have the right to endanger their lives by rejecting modern food production techniques. What they don't have the right to do is force that on the rest of us. That would be the case even if their Bogosity harmed no one. And since it does cause incredible harm, it's even less justified. And they certainly don't have the right to spread misinformation about how safe their death product is, no more than the tobacco companies do. And when the environmental lobby successfully puts government constraints against the production of modern farming and genetically modified food, it's only fair that they be required to play by the same rules that they insisted on. A North Carolina middle school found themselves in violation of state law because it was allowing student groups to sell breakfasts from Chick-fil-A. It had nothing to do with the safety of the students. It was just about preserving the government's monopoly on school food. According to Cleveland County Schools child nutrition stooge Jada Brown, if students get food from somewhere else before lunchtime, it'll eat into the money the school cafeteria gets. And the sad thing is, the law is on his side. Here's a direct quote from the North Carolina General Statutes. All school food services shall be operated on a non-profit basis, and any earnings there, from over and above the cost of operation, as defined herein, shall be used to reduce the cost of food, to serve better food, or to provide free or reduced price lunches to indigent children, and for no other purpose. So if your marching band wants to raise money for a competition, if the history club wants to go to the Smithsonian, or the glee club wants to raise money for a concert, they can't do it by selling food before 1 p.m. And after 1 p.m., everyone's full of the school lunches, so no one will be hungry enough to buy. This is enough to completely shut down sales, which is exactly what Shelby Middle School Principal Tim Quattlebaum ended up doing. This comes only a couple of months after Chicago school prohibited students from bringing in bag lunches. In both situations, the same excuse was given. Nutrition is important, and unless students eat the school lunches, there is no control over the level of nutrition they get. No control? Parents can't feed their own children and control what kind of lunches they bring to school? The school can't oversee the fundraisers of student groups? The only possible control has to be from bureaucrats running the school lunch program? The cult of the omnipotent state strikes again. Of course, if you ask the kids at these schools why they would bring their own lunch or buy the Chick-fil-A breakfast, they'll tell you it's because the school lunches are terrible. So the fact of the matter is, most students, the ones who don't qualify for free lunches, and their parents, are being forced to pay for crappy food. Here's an idea. Make the food taste better. Nutritional food can be delicious too. If you do that, maybe you wouldn't have to worry about the only kind of competition students can take advantage of. That is the difference between government and the free market, folks. Government takes your money, delivers a crappy product, and when you do anything to try to improve things for yourself, they come in and stop you. Parents can feed their own children. School groups can sell nutritious food at fundraisers. Compete, government schools. The result can only be good for our children. Unless, of course, you care more about sustaining your own boondoggles. And now it's time to take 12 years in a vain attempt to educate this week's biggest Bogon Emitter. According to the National Survey of High School Biology Teachers, the nation's biology teachers have been phoning it in when it comes to the most important concept in all biology. They found that only 28% of the nation's biology teachers teach that evolution is the key to linking disparate fields of biology and is the unifying theory that explains all life on Earth. What's worse, they found that 13% explicitly advocated creationism or intelligent design. The remaining 60% are trying to be cautious and coy about teaching evolution to avoid controversy. They might replace evolution with change over time, or downplay its role to avoid complaints by ignorant parents and opportunistic creationists. Despite the fact that they have both sound science and the law on their side, there is just too much pressure on the teachers to avoid teaching the facts. And yes, evolution is a fact. Deal with it. Here's another fact. If there were an alternate theory that had any scientific merit, it would already be in the textbooks. But not only are creationism and intelligent design not shown to have any scientific validity, their supporters haven't even done the first thing to make a sound scientific theory. Scientific theories must make testable predictions, be theoretically falsifiable, and conform to the correspondence principle. Not only have they not done this, they haven't even tried. Can we blame the biology teachers for this? I say, yes, we can. Part of the job of a teacher is to give their students vital information that helps them understand reality and avoid bogosity. Our nation's teachers have been failing at that for a long time, but it's especially bad here. A biology teacher needs to have the courage to stand up to those who would make a fake controversy out of this solely to push their own religious agenda. Imagine if astronomy teachers started coddling astrologers, or history teachers started being coy and timid about the Holocaust for fear of controversy from Holocaust deniers. What if they acted this way in response to moon hoaxers, free energy freaks, and chemtrail nutcases? What would you think about those teachers then? Well, that is exactly how you should feel about these biology teachers. And that's why 72% of the nation's biology teachers are this week's biggest Bogon Emitter. And now it's time to pour sand into the gears of this week's Idiot Extraordinaire. David Barton is a right-wing idiot who pretends to be a historian while getting his history laughably wrong. Listen to what he said this past week on Celebration, a Christian talk show.
You go back to the Founding Fathers, as far as they were concerned, they'd already had the entire debate on creation evolution, and you get Thomas Paine, who's the least religious Founding Father, saying you've got to teach creation science in the public school classroom.
So this guy's a historian, and he doesn't even know that the Founding Fathers formed the country by ratifying the U.S. Constitution in 1789, and Darwin didn't publish Origin of Species until 1859, 70 years later? Well, never mind the failure of being a historian, this guy even fails at basic math. And the Thomas Paine thing is just made-up nonsense. Never mind that Barton never cites a source for this. Never mind the fact that Darwin was only 4 months old when Paine died. How does this guy square his bogus claim with Paine's essay, The Age of Reason? Quote, "It is certain that what is called the Christian system of faith, including in it the whimsical account of creation, are all irreconcilable, not only to the divine gift of reason that God hath given to man, but to the knowledge that man gains of the power and wisdom of God by the aid of the sciences and by studying the structure of the universe that God has made. The setters up, therefore, and the advocates of the Christian system of faith could not but foresee that the continually progressive knowledge that man would gain by the aid of science would militate against and call into question the truth of their system of faith, and therefore it became necessary to their purpose to cut learning down to a size less dangerous to their project, and this they effected by restricting the idea of learning to the dead study of dead languages. They not only rejected the study of science out of the Christian schools, but they persecuted it, and it is only within about the last 2 centuries that the study has been revived. Sounds pretty clear to me whose side Payne was on, and it certainly wasn't Barton's. Well, don't worry, Barton. This hideous blunder doesn't mean your career is over. There are plenty of non-thinking creduloids for you to dupe, and best case scenario, you're perfectly qualified to be the running mate for Sarah Palin if she gets the GOP nomination. And even if she turns you down, you'll still be able to go the rest of your life assured in your position as this week's
Idiot Extraordinaire.
Well, that wraps up this Epicurean edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and participate in discussions about these subjects and anything else you like. And if you'd like to participate in the Bogosity podcast, you can send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. If you put it in an MP3 file, it just might get played in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Albert Shanker, former president of the American Federation of Teachers. It's time to admit that public education operates like a planned economy, a bureaucratic system in which everybody's role is spelled out in advance and there are few incentives for innovation and productivity. It's no surprise that our school system doesn't improve. It more resembles the communist economy than our own market economy. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Unported license.
Bogosity.